Hey, good to see you. Thanks for coming. There's another episode of Wireframe brought to you by Design Systems House. I'm your host, Don Diamato, and today we're going to be talking about reading as a system. Sorry it was a little bit late on the intro there. I had my guest who is absolutely raring to go, and we're going to bring him on just a moment here. But I'm super excited to talk about this stuff because, as you folks know, I am very much into design systems. So anything that we could do as a system is really interesting to me. And this is a topic that I've never really considered about being a system. So I'm really excited to bring on a guest that is all about this idea of reading as a system. And to do that, here I have a man named Bram Adams. Bram, great to have you on the show. Thank you for being here. Can you tell the folks here in the audience who you are and what kind of expertise you're bringing?
Thanks for having me, Donnie. I appreciate it. Yeah, I am Bram. I studied computer science at university, and I feel like that's an interesting start to my narrative if I were to do like a 30-second spiel about myself, because it really made me fall in love with systems, information systems, how data falls through pipelines and can be mutated into something else. From there, I actually lost a lot of motivation when I entered the real software engineering world. I was at HBO and I wasn't necessarily happy. I was like having a good enough time, but the code that I did for full-time work was very different than the code that I did for artistic exploration almost, and my own kind of educational, intellectual satisfaction that I got from my university. From there, though, I switched to developer advocacy. So I kind of wanted to kind of like flex my muscles a little bit more in the teaching space. I kind of got more on stage. I started talking to people, talking to other developers. But then eventually I kind of like fell out of that too. And then I kind of started to be like, oh, maybe I want to be an artist. So I started making art, and my art was terrible. So I was like, I should stop doing this, or at least be more realistic with how my art career could play out. So I was like, I wonder if I can kind of meld the two. So right around that time, COVID had hit. This was about 2020. I was one of the earliest people involved with the GPT-3 beta at the time from OpenAI. So yeah, I was like one of the first like 80 people in their Slack, and I was playing with this technology, and you had to submit a reason as to why you wanted to use this transformer model. And I was like, I want to use it to write metalcore lyrics. I listened to a lot of like Sleeping with Sirens and System of a Down. Oddly specific.
Yeah.
So I was using it to kind of, and it kind of scratched that itch pretty well, especially at the time, where it was like both probabilistic and weird, but then it was also deterministic and something I was similar to from my education and kind of upbringing through the computer science education system. And I think that, from that point, I was kind of in a position where I was like, okay, now what do I want to do with this? What do I want to say with this technology? Not just AI, but just kind of like in general. And I knew that I was also really obsessed with reading. Actually, this wall behind me is the Hall of Fame for all 5-star books that I've read over the years. So this is just like printouts of small covers of books that I rated 5 stars since like 2018. And I kind of became fascinated with the intersection between the human mind and how it stores information and how computers store and deliver information. And from there, that's kind of how I ended up where I currently am.
Okay. Well, that's one heck of a history. Goodness gracious. You did a lot of, I mean, I really appreciate that from my perspective, because I've also done a lot of jumping around. I was a professional dancer when I was younger. I was an investigator at UPS when I was younger. So, all these experiences come together to form the person that you are today, and will continue to form the person as you are moving forward. So that's, the experience is really interesting. I mean, just imagining, I mean, I guess this makes a little bit of sense. I want to give some context to the folks in the audience about how we got connected, because effectively I met Bram on the streets of New York. That's effectively what happened. I'll be a little bit more clear on this in particular. Is that Bram and I were actually both at the AT Proto NYC meetup. I think it was last week, right? Last week.
Last week.
And we were both there. Well, at least I was there certainly just to learn about what this new technology is. And it kind of sounds like you're in a similar situation where you're just like, what's this new thing? I want to, kind of smell it out. What's going on with this new thing, and being a part of a community and seeing, or not necessarily maybe a part of it, but injecting yourself maybe into the community a little bit to see like what's going on in there, the same way that you did the GPT kind of transformer thing. And he was talking about reading systems. We had to walk outside, and I said, I absolutely need to have you on the show to learn more about it, to really dive in. So that's why Bram's on here today. And this is the kind of thing that I love about, tech communities in New York specifically, because these people come outside, you get to meet great people. I think, from what I've talked to Bram very shortly amount before the show and a little bit now, I think the vibe is so good. I'll just say that right there.
I feel like, one of my favorite books, I think it might be up here, is called Where Good Ideas Come From by Stephen Johnson. And he describes the difference between an urban area and a rural area. And what I really liked was he kind of described cities as a coral reef for mankind. It's where you can run into a bunch of different people. You find your niche. You swim amongst people who are like yourself, but you're neighbors with people who are completely different. And I grew up in a very small town. And in the small town that I grew up in, there's this blanket. It's a blanket that feels comfortable in a certain way because you know everybody, and there's a certain sense of security that comes from the slowness of living. But I think what makes New York City so fascinating, and why it's the kind of tour de jour of force, why people always talk about it in media, is that it has this vivacity that is just the true depth of human curiosity and experience. You can never be the central. You might be for a moment, New York might think of you as the central kind of character, whether you're finance or Broadway or whatever the historical kind of like history that New York has had. But New York always moves, and it always replaces people, and it kind of takes us in and out of life. So I am so grateful for this city. It has made me appreciate the yes that comes with living a life and living an interesting life by default.
Yeah, likewise. Absolutely. Yeah, it's same for me. It's just like I can't be away from the city. I always thought like, some of the cities that I've traveled to, I'm like, is this a city? Because New York's a city. The life, the vibrance, the energy behind New York is just something that you just can't capture. It's just something good. I want to get into the actual topic today, which is reading as a system. I really want to dive into that topic. So tell me, I guess, how are you finding reading as a system? Maybe, or is that the right place to start? Do you think that's right, or is there something?
Sure, I think I can start with a relatively high level definition, and we can feel it out and see if that feels good to you.
Hell yeah.
So I think a high level definition of a system is something that has stocks, flows, and loops, feedback systems. This actually comes from Thinking Like a System by Donella Meadows, which is a very popular book about systems thinking. And let's think about that from a reading perspective. So when you pick up a book, there are ordered symbols for every book. If you pick up Crime and Punishment and The Great Gatsby, no matter what copy you pick up, the symbols are going to be in the same order. It's going to be the same words per each story. So let's say that you take both of those and you turn them into a list of words, which is just like an array of words. And then one by one, you start replacing the words of Great Gatsby with Crime and Punishment. Eventually what you end up with is Crime and Punishment, right, or like an amalgamation of the two, right? So that's one level. And then you think about us as readers. So we have this memory, most of us who are literate in the framing of a modern American concept of when we were 6-ish or 5-ish, our parents kind of and teachers put us through the ringer of kind of like getting phonetics and grammar into our head until we could read the written language of English. And it was kind of a hard one thing. But then it basically becomes automatic. Our brains, whenever we see symbols in our native language, immediately start comprehending them. And I think a way to kind of understand this is, again, to use Crime and Punishment as an example. Crime and Punishment in Cyrillic and Russian makes sense to people who can read in Russian. But for people who are native English speakers who don't speak Russian, it doesn't make sense. So there must be something going on there in the reader system that can read certain symbols and decode them, but not other symbols that other people can decode, right? So that's another part, right? So now all of a sudden we have books as an ordered set of symbols. That's the same from book reader to reader. We have readers themselves, which have some kind of decoding process that's going on in their brains. And then we have a third thing, which is memory. And memory kind of exists, I think, outside and inside of the reader. I've been referencing a few books during this conversation already. These are things that are kind of popping up in the electrical storm of my neurons, but I also have an external memory of commonplace books, of different ideas that I've captured from books over the years that I don't remember. These are things that don't stick in my short-term memory or my long-term memory. These are things that have not deemed themselves, I guess, worthy enough for my biological sense of survival, that my brain has decided that these things are worth forgetting. And anyway, if we take all of these moving parts, we realize that these parts can be engineered. You can do different things to them to become better at the decoding of symbols. You can do certain things to be better at how you kind of like choose your books and ask questions about the books that you want to be reading. You can do things like parallel reading, which is a thing that I'm very passionate about and spend a lot of time describing to people. And all of these are things that you can do to a car, similar to, right? You can soup up the engine, or you can address the friction of the tires, or you can pay attention to the aerodynamics of the hood. And all of those things make the car go faster. And I feel there's something similar to be said about reading, where a lot of people will treat reading as this passive thing where they go to a library, they pick up a book that's interesting, they like the cover, they turn the pages, and then it's over. And then you ask them maybe about it in their book club, but that's about it. There's not a lot of introspection. And I think that thinking about reading as a system gives us the permission to do that introspection and to do that kind of experimentation to create a better system for ourselves and our reading lives.
Yeah. Wow. So there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to unpack there. You gave us one heck of an overview for sure. I'll tell you what, some of what you've said to me reminds me of some of my interest in linguistics a long time ago, which in fact, in the studio, there's a whole like bookcase of linguistic stuff that's literally in front of me here. And it reminds me of the difference between syntax and pragmatics and discourse analysis and all those different fields or subsections of linguistics to understand, the communication that's happening, and even the writing systems, right? You were talking about the symbols, where if you are, if you have a book in a different language, right? Well, the book itself has content that is useful to someone, but unfortunately you might not be the audience simply because of the symbols used in that book, right? So it's entirely possible, what is it? I'm trying to think of, you probably know better, but of like a famous book that had to be translated for it to be more widely adopted. Is there anything that
the Nicomachean Ethics? I mean, yeah. Aristotle wrote that book thousands of years before modern English existed, and I read it in English last year.
There you go. Yeah. So yes, that's the kind of thing that I'm picking up here is just that piece, and systems are a combination or a composition of pieces, right? So those are the pieces that you've kind of enumerated there about here are the pieces of the system and how we eventually read. But, is it centralized to reading? Because I think of linguistics as, of course, more than just reading, right? I mean, imagine, and we're going to talk a little bit about AI right now, because there's the conversational piece, right? And that conversational piece doesn't necessarily need to be reading as much as it needs to be comprehension of the ideas being shared. So are you specifically, focused on, I guess, the reading part of the system as opposed to the communication part? Is there a difference, or how does that work for you?
That's a great question. I think that, well, there's a few things that matter here. One is that reading has there's a bunch of thought pieces on the internet. One just came out the Atlantic the other day that said that the end of reading is here. It's basically the author delivers a bunch of statistics about how people are reading less books than ever, but we are reading by volume just as much. We just do a lot of fragmentary reading now. We read a lot of emails, we read a lot of YouTube titles, we read a lot of like short snippets, but we don't do kind of long form reasoning over symbols. And I think this is really interesting because in the piece she talks about Plato, and Plato was an interesting character. He was very against reading. He thought that Greece moving from an oral society to a written society would be bad for people's memories. It would kind of preclude them from being able to kind of make deep arguments, kind of similar to maybe what I'm talking about here. But what actually ended up happening was that we got history, right? Like before writing existed, there was no such thing as history. History couldn't be unless again, like the imperfect lineage of people describing a narrative of what their grandfather did and what their grandfather did and what their grandmother did. You end up with this kind of oral soup. And there's a book that I'm excited to get to by Walter Ong called Orality and Literacy that I have on this late for later this year. So I'm sure I'll have more to say about it at that point. But to your initial question of like, is this about comprehension? Is this about sharing and kind of like conversation within a network? Linguistics is interesting because language is a very language is a very powerful but general tool. It has very few rules, but it's very stick-to-itive about those rules. And for example, English grammar is a very flexible kind of like you can mix and match words, but like you change the meaning of certain things if you say them in certain ways. And I think that is something that is hard to do without people saying words to each other all the time. That grammar is almost a bottom-up thing, whereas what I'm talking about with comprehension and throughput when it comes to reading, it's a combination of bottom up and top down. It's bottom up because you're reading these words, you're forgetting these words as you're automatically reading them, which is a thing that I also talk about to a number of people who work with me. But then two, you are creating, you already have a top-down narrative of where this book lives in your overall ecosystem. You might be reading Hamlet and then kind of already kind of doing the mental gymnastics to compare Hamlet's ghost father to your modern perspective. Right. And I think that is a top down way of thinking. Reading is a very isolating kind of almost activity. You and I can read the exact same book and get something completely different from it.
Right.
So it is a conversation in the sense of you are having a conversation with the author of the book and you're having a conversation with other people about the book, especially if you're in a book club. But it's mainly a conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that is another reason that I think of reading as a system and why I prioritize helping people kind of focus on the reader as opposed to any particular book, because you are the main 95% of whatever your library becomes. And I think that we don't think of it like that because we think of a library as a kind of intellectual artifact that somebody has with this fancy room and they're smoking cigars and they have the big red armchair. But really, the books that you chose, why you chose them, what they mean to you, what you've forgotten about them, are actually the majority of what a library is.
Yeah. There's something really nice about what that ending part about that, where you could see the books around you and how they tell a story about who you are. Right. Again, just looking at the shelf that I have in front of me here, you could see the interests that I've had. You might not be able to see necessarily the timeline because it's hard to tell when I got any particular book, but at least you could see what the interests are in there. And similarly, when my wife and I moved in together, she had her own box of books that she brought along, and you could see what her interests have been over time. So there's something really interesting about that. And you're right about like the trope of having this grandiose library in your domicile that's like got the whole like red velvet situation in there. There's something really interesting about that. But yeah, I mean, going back to the original kind of like fragmented reading that we're getting to. I mean, talking about the reading as a systems in your who you're consulting with. Is there a world where we, I don't know, undo this fragmented kind of reading that we're getting into right now? Like, I mean, and I thinking about like what you said about Plato, where, he was kind of anti reading writing because of the oral situation. Do you think, I'm asking a whole bunch of questions here, but do you think it's a bad thing that reading is fragmented? And if so, how would we potentially change it?
Sure. Another good question. List of questions, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I think that I'll start with the fragmentary thing, because partially it is a moral crisis kind of liberal elite narrative. And what I use that term lovingly. I mean, there's kind of a coastal elite idea of like, oh, the people aren't reading anymore, they're stupid. But that's also true. It's like there is
right. It's funny because it's true. Yeah.
It's funny because it's true kind of thing happening where really, if you would look at the work of like Neil Postman, Marshall McLuhan, this happened with the start of television. Television and radio were really effective modes of communicating to a vast number of people a message, right? And then the messages became more fragmented over time, especially now in the era that we live in with social media fragmentary kind of, you watch a 10-second video that I'll never see. I watch a 10-second video that you'll never see. The thinking here, though, the kind of like, again, if we're to dig out of this, just the moral argument of people kind of like wanting to complain about something, is the deeper perhaps red alarm here is that it does take a certain type of mental calisthenics to be able to focus on an argument for an extended period of time and to be able to compare that and world build around that, to be able to look at the progression of a character throughout a story and kind of see how their thinking has changed, to be able to understand how the choices made by a leader like Deng Xiaoping made modern China, right? And these things happen, they can't really happen in fragmentary reading. And the reason for that is that words aren't dense enough to supply that context. So if there was a mode of transmission that could exist where we do get the same amount of information density for less, I'm sure we would go for it. But the thing, and I think summary is actually a really good example of this, we rush to tools like a ChatGPT to summarize the thing as opposed to paying attention to the thing. And for a lot of cases, I do the same. I think that I want to preface this by saying I read 60 books a year, but I also nurse an active YouTube addiction. I'm a millennial, right? So I think that it's not as if, you become a perfect reader and all of a sudden you feel no need to kind of mess with the mortals and play around on social media anymore and spend time on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitch or whatever your drug of choice is. That's not the case. What is the case is that by adding reading to your daily life, adding this long form thinking to your daily life, it's a lot like fitness. It's a lot like movement. It applies a lot of downhill improvements to a person's thinking life that they can't get otherwise. So if you cut reading out of your life, the problem with like replacing all reading with fragmentary reading is that we're losing both, maybe in Plato's world, we're losing both the literacy gain that we got from long form comprehension of I can now make an argument that exists outside of the linear conversational format, and I can make it really long and I can take a lot of time to research it and I can remember what was written down and I can come back to it and edit it and be like, no, that wasn't quite right. I think this is better. I can kind of like revisit ideas and put them into a table of contents, which is its own ontology. But then if you just take the fragments, again, as you might have noticed, it's less about engagement in the sense of like cognitive full thinking, getting all the brain parts involved. And it's more about engagement at the level of like, am I being entertained or am I being bored? And that is basically the only trigger that people will have to whether or not they should keep reading something or engage with something. And I think that style of consumption is easy, but easy doesn't mean good. Easy doesn't mean better. Right. Writing wasn't an easy replacement to the oral kind of narrative of the Greek culture. Writing was actually very difficult. We didn't get Shakespeare for another 1,200 or another 1,000 years or whatever, whenever he lived. And then we're still getting amazing writers to this day. So I think that, again, not from the moral perspective of I think America's getting stupid and I want to be holier than thou, but like a lot of the work that I try to do with reading as a system is kind of introduce people to strategies that are practical for the modern use case to just have more reading in your life. I don't think you need to be finishing books necessarily. I don't think you need to always be kind of like trying to read the hardest book that's available to you at any given moment, trying to get through War and Peace by Tolstoy. What you should be doing is always reading a little bit every day. You should always have some words flowing through your head. You should always be kind of considering some idea from some book that's interesting to you, whether it's a biography or a fiction book or a nonfiction book, or ideally all of the above at the same time.
Mhm.
We also happen to live in a time, because of the fragmentary kind of screens making so much money, there are now e-ink screens like Kindle, for example, where you can read. I have hundreds of books on this thing, right? That is a thing that in human history has never existed. And to be able to choose that while the rest of the world is swimming in the whirlpool of kind of freneticism, to opt out, even just for a while, and read is a very, very powerful gift, but it also takes a certain amount of discipline.
Yeah.
So I'm wary of telling people, hey, social media bad, you should feel guilty, because that's not a really realistic kind of thing to do in a system. But it is realistic to tell people it is bad, but here's why it's bad, and here's how you can coexist with it.
Right. I mean, saying why is important, right. I think. And I do that all the time for my research, is all about saying why. And I want to go back a little bit, because you were talking about the way that we as a society tend to summarize, right? And and it's funny, because what immediately came to mind for me was actually part of the conversation we started with about being in New York, because there is a phrase that we have basically reduced down to 6 letters, or, well, 7 characters, but 6 letters. And the phrase is, do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Lots of words in there, but we don't got time for that. So what do we say? We say, "Not mean?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we all know what the heck we're talking about when we say "not mean." Not mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the summary thing doesn't necessarily, I guess, disqualify the content or the context necessarily, but what we're trying to do is optimize for potentially more, right? So I think there's something interesting about that, because maybe like thinking about there's so many things going on, and I'll blame this a little bit on the internet, because before that, you'd just be like in your bubble of information, right? You only had the books that were available to you, or the newspaper that was coming out to you, or the television, networks that were in your area. So you only had so much. Now with the internet, you feel like you are always uninformed, right? There's always some more information. So now we've tried to figure out tricks and things like that to now get as much information as possible, especially since now we're trying to make informed decisions, right? And in order to make an informed decision, you need a lot of information to do so, especially if you think that you're like, the unknown knowns that are out there, just like, oh, well, I know there's things that I don't know, so I got to go find those things too, and I'll tack on a little bit extra, because this was exactly the problem that I was doing with the AT protocol stuff, because I just launched some theming things in there, and it was very overwhelming, the technical parts of it, and I wanted to summarize it. So that's where I used ChatGPT effectively. Well, I actually used Claude, but I used an LLM to help me reduce it down so that I could understand what's happening, right? So there is certainly some positivity to the reduction of it here. But I think what you said toward the end there about it being educational, or what was the other thing? Informational? Was that
informational? Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So those basically those two things that are coming out of the reason why you read, I guess. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that reading is so important to me, not only just because it's introduced me to ideas that have changed my life. It's introduced me to thinkers that aren't accessible to me and have changed my life.
Got it.
And I think that the functional utility of being a reader in kind of the informational sense is that you are kind of you're maybe like looking for an answer for something. And I think that I do that for some books, and then for other books I don't do that as much. And I guess if I were to kind of like tie it into where the kind of ecosystem right now, especially the business ecosystem, the social media ecosystem, we live, as you pointed out, in a very kind of informationally kind of high throughput society, really, to be honest with you. There's millions of words that you could be reading at any given moment that didn't exist a second ago, right? Because they all get uploaded every second. They might have existed in that person's head, but now all of a sudden they're saved to this kind of global archive of everybody's consciousness. And then, you know, some things people are like, you have to understand this. If you don't understand this, you're going to be behind. And I think that it really just depends on what your goals are. And one of the advantages of becoming a deep reader, one of the advantages of becoming perhaps well-read, is that you become a little bit more aware of the kind of ridiculousness of it all, or the absurdity is probably a better word that I'm looking here for, where, you know, I read a few years ago, I was on a kick of reading books about like the value of the intellectual life and if it was worth living or not, because there's a lot of kind of modern content where people will talk about the virtues of kind of going offline and homesteading or owning your own farm, but there's not a lot of people who will talk about locking yourself away and just studying, right? And just becoming a monk, as it were, right? Just locking yourself in a room and just really deep diving into any particular topic. That doesn't pay these days. What pays these days is the kind of constant online, always be there, always be present, always be sharing what your thoughts are, even if they're incomplete. And what I kind of got from this era of reading kind of like a biography of Malcolm X, Lost in Thought by Zena Hitz, Martin Eden, was that knowledge and intellectual life is a thing that you have to pursue for itself. There isn't an end goal to curiosity that is going to replace curiosity as a whole. Curiosity as a whole is the point. I think that the kind of informational kind of like land grab of the modern way of thinking about things, where it's like, I just need that frenetic hit. It's more of a itch that we're scratching from an addiction than a kind of like a deep reflection, kind of like, I just want to spend time looking at birds and kind of doing like, you know, drawings of birds and not really think about where these drawings of birds are going to end up. And I want people to have more drawing with birds. Some of the people who I follow, who I like the most on the internet, are Rajiv Surendra and Cal Newport. And both Rajiv Surendra was in Mean Girls. He was Kevin G, the Indian rapper. But he grew up into like this polymath kind of person who has all of these really cool hobbies of watercolor and calligraphy. And he like goes into a 40-minute video on how to wash your floor. Like, he pays deep, detailed attention to things. Cal Newport wrote deep work. He wrote So Good They Can't Ignore You. He writes all these books that kind of are advertising perhaps slowing down the life that you lead. And I think that that is something that reading is accessible for the average person. So if I were to make, again, an argument for, you know, what is it about the fragmentary thing that's so attractive versus kind of like the curiosity that you can get your itch scratched with reading, and why might I not just want to just continue to summarize things? I would say that the problem with summary is that it's still working towards an end goal that's outside of the summary. So when you summarize something, you're doing it because you have something else that you want to achieve. Whereas like if you're just appreciating a book that you want to spend time with, or you have a question that you want to have answered serendipitously within those pages, you're doing it for that. If that makes sense.
No.
It's the why are you doing this? If you're doing it for an external thing, you're more likely to reach for a summary, which is fine. And I reach for summaries all the time. As a matter of fact, to kind of quell my YouTube addiction a bit, I will go on YouTube videos and I will hit the little Gemini button and I'll be like, summarize the video. And it saves me like 20 minutes most of the time, because it's not like a video that I'm really actually trying to watch most times, but I just feel compelled to click it like a junkie. Like, you know what I mean, right? Like I'll see it in the related
put it in my
feed,
veins.
and I'm just like, put it in my veins. Let's go. But if I'm coming back to a book that's taking me hours and hours and days and weeks to read and get through, then it's like, oh, well, I have a deeper relationship with this information. I have a deeper understanding of what's going on at RJR Nabisco in the 1980s, or what happened to Buckminster Fuller after his daughter died in 1922, or what happened to Deng Xiaoping when he was implementing the four modernizations in China in the 1970s. Like, I have a deeper understanding of those concepts. And it was because I didn't summarize myself.
Right. No, it's great. And I love that separation that you're talking about, because, you know, like I said earlier about the work that I was doing with the theming stuff, is that I summarized it mostly because I knew that it was important, but I didn't find it to be important for me to necessarily learn it right then and there, right? Where in other ways, in terms of, again, the goal that you have, right? If the goal that you have is to understand this wholly and completely, right? Then you're not going to summarize it, right? You're going to actually go in and find out and go deep into whatever this stuff is. And this is giving me a little bit of, I guess, thought about how in my work, in terms of the design system stuff that we've done for so long, there's been a huge focus on documentation for such a long time. And the big thing that we've always had against it is that no one reads the docs, right? No one reads the docs. Or effectively, they want it summarized, right? It's all of these problems that you are now just raising to me here in terms of identifying what's going on, where, yeah, I mean, if this person doesn't really care about the design system or the work that you're doing or whatever it is, it's just part of the job, then yeah, they're going to want the summary. They're going to want, you know, here's the component, slap it in my my app, and I'm off to the races, right? Meanwhile, people who actually care are going to go ahead and really go and dive into those docs and be like, okay, well, what about this? What about that? Et cetera, et cetera. Like, I've found myself doing that on other public documentation sites, going, okay, so, well, hold on a second. How do you handle this? Right? I'd like to know how you handle this so that I can make a determination about how I should handle it, not necessarily stealing it one for one, but actually understand the why, right? The purpose. We were talking about that piece. That's great. I'm going to put a pin in this particular piece. The thing that I think I would like to get to next is that you were talking about, you know, again, consulting with folks and trying to improve their habits in reading, right? And I imagine that everyone's different, right? And their goals are going to be different and things of that nature. But let's go ahead and have my goals out here. So
Yeah, please.
if I wanted to improve my reading, right? And let's say that what I would like to do is I would like to, I don't know if I'd say, I don't know. How would I find out what my problem is? Let me start with that. What is my problem with reading? How would I find out?
That's great. No, I feel like that is something. And again, there are so many moving parts here because, you know, you and I live in a society of libraries. We live in a society of bookstores, of kind of television shows where people will carry books and are like, oh, well, he's smart, right? And so it's like, how do you find yourself in this narrative? How do you find yourself in this society, in this story? And I think the place to start with any reading goals is to kind of find, similar to your kind of fitness goals, your baseline. So find kind of like what you're comfortable with, find what you're uncomfortable with, and find what your kind of goals. Oh, did my camera just turn off?
Yes, it did.
My camera, it just said that it overheated.
Oh, okay. We're hot out here. Okay.
It's hot. It's hot in this room. Can I switch over to my MacBook?
Yeah, go ahead. Switch over. That's fine.
Okay, let me try that.
No problem. We're doing it live, folks. It's okay.
We're doing it live. Yeah, my camera literally, I like looked at it, said, it's like, I'm too hot. I'm overheating. Yeah, let me see. Is that,
I see you. Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm on my MacBook camera now. Okay.
That'll work.
So the where was I just lost my train of thought when my camera blew up. Is that like, if you're looking for to kind of figure out what your problem is with reading, it's to kind of like it's a little bit of introspection here. But let's make this quick. Let's actually try and do this. So it's like, A, what was the last thing you read? B, when was the last time that you were excited to, maybe actually instead of A and B, let's just do this. When was the last time that you were excited to read? And then 2, what would make you excited to read in the future?
Okay. All right. That's cool. All right. So what was the last time I felt excited to read something? Ooh, okay. I'm trying to think. I think, well, there was the last book that I remember reading that I was really excited throughout the reading. I don't even remember the name of it because it's been so long ago. I just don't remember the name of it. But here's what I'll make it a little bit easier. I think the Malcolm Gladwell kind of telling you a story and then leading up to a like moral of the story or the learning of the story or whatever that is, those end up giving me a good feeling at the end, because I get a little bit of history about some stuff that's happened and some learnings that happened from that that I could potentially take back for myself to then implement or improve my life in some way so that I don't repeat history, right? Like, that's the doom of that potentially. So that's, I think, the general gist, but that's been a long time ago. That's been years ago. And I haven't admittedly done a lot of, a lot of reading since then. I've been, swimming around side projects expected.
Right.
So I guess in the future, I feel like I would want more of that, but I guess the question then is like, how do I find more of that? Like, is it just literally just like related authors and move forward? Is that the answer, or what? How does that work?
No, well, I was actually gonna come in there because I think that there's that is a very interesting immediate approach, right? So if these are the types of authors that appeal to you, if this is the type of media that appeals to you, then the deeper thing is that what you just said a second ago, where you're like, I like the feeling of these stories being set up and then something that I can apply to my own life. So that's actually probably what you're looking for. So I think that the thing for you to do would be to, well, take advantage of bookstores and libraries. And here's a really good, easy thing to do for someone who hasn't read in a while, is don't commit to the first book that you see at a bookstore, right? So we feel like almost inclined to pick up a book and then be like, well, this is the one. Throw it in our bag and then like walk out of the store. But that's actually a really unstrategic way of doing things. So if you know that this is your goal is that, hey, I want something that improves my life. Generally, that's going to be in the self-help business section, but not always. I think maybe you can start there to kind of like give yourself a grounded compass of books that like appeal to you, but then go to the other sections, go to the religious section, go to the fiction sections, go to the cookbook sections, right? Don't feel limited in this bookstore. But then what you do is, instead of just reading or looking at the cover and being like, oh, I like the title, open up to the table of contents, see what the author is going to be arguing, see what the structure of their argument is, kind of skim it, you know what I mean? Go to a random chapter and skim a few paragraphs, see if you like the writing style, kind of ingratiate yourself within the written word at a very non-committal level. All right, and then
it sounds like you're saying to summarize. That's what I'm sounding like.
No.
Summarize what's going on in the book.
I'm saying read effectively and to choose what you read deeply. So it's like you'll read a number of table of contents of books, and then eventually you'll start to notice like things that like are repeating in your brain. Right. And then once you find things that are repeating or a writing style that you like a lot, buy that book. Like that's the book that you should probably be reading. And then I think, again, like I said a few minutes ago, the purpose of reading in terms of having a reader's life is a lot like the purpose of being fit. It's like this thing that you just do on a daily basis. Like you should be doing some amount of reading on a daily basis. It shouldn't feel like a punishment necessarily, but it's all not going to be hyper exciting all the time too, right? So there's going to be some periods of time where the books that you're reading are not good books, or maybe they haven't gotten to the good part yet. And you need to also be able to develop the muscle to determine whether you should drop a book or not. And this is something that you pick up over time. This isn't something that you can just immediately grok and be like, no, I know when to drop a book. It's a skill. And I think being able to give yourself the opportunity, and maybe if I were to make this a little bit more kind of parable, like, is that like, if you imagine yourself as your reading life is a potential stream. When you're not reading, the spigot is like closed off. So those words that can come out of books are closed off to you. So when you open the spigot, there is, again, a tendency to kind of just like open it full blast. But what I'm saying is that it actually is smarter to open the spigot in such a way that like different types of books are coming at you. So you're not just like being hit by one writer's opinions over and over. Right. Read like 2 or 3 books at a time. Keep multiple books in your queue so that when you get bored or done with a book, you can quickly kind of move to a different book. And I think that this is a skill that once you develop, you will be shocked about how you read before it. Because like reading sequentially, as you mentioned, taking years in between reading is a thing that you're only really robbing yourself of the opportunities and kind of interesting ideas that could come out of the page and find themselves to you, and find their way to you in the way that you want to live your life. And then to the second thing that you said, and I think this is also maybe equally, if not more relevant, is when you said it's not just about the book, it's about how it affects your life after you close the book. So what you're going to need is a commonplace system. I mentioned this earlier with the Commonplace books, but a commonplace system is basically a system that lives externally to any book. And imagine like the people who like read books and they leave like all the dog ears and the post-it notes and stuff. This is a third-party journal that you keep. I have mine here, which is like a field notes journal. And then I like write in this field notes journal like my own shorthand that I've created for the books that I'm reading. And the advantage of this is that this holds multiple books. This is a tiny book that holds multiple books. And so once you do that, you give yourself what I call like revisitation. And basically revisitation is the core of how a book can actually influence your life, because you need to be able to revisit concepts and context from it outside of the page from which you found it. Does that make sense? So imagine that you're going to be in a conversation with somebody, or you're making a decision and you're like, oh yeah, I remember when Virginia Woolf said this, or I remember when blah, blah, blah said this, or I was reading this book about Abraham Lincoln and he did this kind of like similar thing. You need to pattern match. And the only way to pattern match is to see it in multiple places. Right.
That makes sense for me. And actually, as an aside, you just said that you made your own shorthand. Is that accurate?
I did. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
hold on a second. Hold on. We're gonna tangent for a second, just a little bit, because why did you make your own versus use an existing system of shorthand?
So I think that that's a great question. The storing and searching are kind of inverse equations in terms of difficulty. What I mean by that is like, let's think about your if you had like a pile of clothes on your floor. I learned this when I was a computer science student. But like, if you just wantonly throw clothes on your floor, it's a very fast store operation, right? You're just throwing clothes into a pile. You're not carrying it. They're just going into the same pile. But let's say you need to find one shirt in that pile. Now you need to look through the whole pile to find that shirt, right? Inversely, let's say that you like have like a really rigid hanging closet dresser system. So it takes you a while to hang up clothes, right? Because you're like, oh, this has to go in the one place, but then you find it like that, right? So these things are almost inverse. Like the time that it takes you to store something and the time that it takes you to find something are kind of like combating with each other. And you have to put more into storing to find quicker. And you have to put more into finding if you store quicker. So the advantage of a shorthand is that a shorthand tries to ameliorate both things at once. It tries to make it easy enough that searching works, but then also easy enough that you will actually do the effort of storing, because storing takes a certain amount of energy when you do it in real time.
Yeah.
So what I like to do with my shorthand, and I can just describe it because it's pretty straightforward, is that I have a list of books on the start of my field notes that I'm reading. So like in this one, for example, it's How to Talk About Books You Haven't Read, Boredom by Alberto Moreava, Barbarians at the Gate by R.J.R. Nabisco. I read 8 books at a time. I read 5 textbooks or books in text, and then I read 3 audiobooks. And that's really easy because I do my reading mainly digitally. I read on Kindle and I read on Audible. So they save where I was when I hit pause or when I close the app, right? So what I do when I'm saving something that interests me. So for example, here's something from B2 page 134, which is the book Boredom. On page 134, I wrote B2 P134 staircase in brackets. So basically, let's imagine what happens when I search on my Kindle. There could be multiple instances of staircase in a book. That's a relatively common word. It's not necessarily the most common word, but it's a word that you hear quite a bit, right? He was on the staircase. He was on the staircase. There was a staircase in the house, right? So how do I know which staircase was the one that was interesting to me when I go back and look at this months later, right? I go to the page number. So the page number is like 134, staircase. And then I reread that section. And I've experimented with different forms of this a lot over the years. I used to, I mean, I still do like do highlighting in the traditional sense and send it to a system called Readwise, which is a really great application for people who want to kind of like sync their Kindle quotes into a third-party system where they can kind of engage with them at the flashcard level and stuff. But I found that I needed to like go back to the context of the page. It's almost as if like I needed to like see the whole image as opposed to just the highlight. So sometimes I'll switch between the two. But the advantage of this too is that I also get a log of how my reading is going. So again, you can't really see it on this tiny camera. Maybe if I like zoom in like that, you can kind of see the ellipses and semicolons and stuff like that. So like what happens is that like I'm reading this book, the same book, then I go dot 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 136 vainly, dot 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 140 doubt, dot 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 being ghosted feels like this in double brackets, dot 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 painting alone. So I know if I don't include a page number, it's on the same page that I highlighted it before. If I do dot dot dot, that's a continuation, and if I do triple semicolons, that's a end of that.
Okay.
So it's a very quick shorthand to write when you're reading, because it's just like I just write the page number and then I write one word generally, right? And I try to choose a word in the block that doesn't like, not like or the, or like something that could even it happen multiple times in a page, but something that looks like it's only happening one time or so in the page.
Now,
and then
I just wanted to touch upon a little bit about the systems part of that, because the thing that I'm thinking about is like, you know, I think on one hand, making your own system such that you are able to be more efficient in the reading, so the comprehension stays and all that stuff, makes a lot of sense to me. But we were talking all the way at the top of the show about how if the book was in Cyrillic, that then that information is not helpful for anybody else. So have you considered the possibility of, you know, this system that you have right now, having it be more aligned to a standard or something more generic that you know that is a system existing, or are you doing this specifically because this is what works for you and it's your own system and you're okay with that?
I think it's a little column A and a little column B, to be honest with you. I think reading is an idiosyncratic thing because, again, we all have different goals for our reading. So the value earlier you said, oh, I think I want to read more because I want it to affect my life. And authors like Malcolm Gladwell were effective to my life I don't really find Malcolm Gladwell that interesting as an author personally. You know what I mean? I've read Blink, I've read Outliers. I remember reading those books. I like his kind of like pop sci delivery. He has a very clear form of writing. It's very kind of punchy, but I prefer the kind of more the authors that kind of are a little bit more intellectually kind of unapologetic than Nassim Taleb's in that kind of vein of where they kind of are almost rude to their readers, right? In a way that it's like the way that they're using their words is kind of like, you know, forget about you. I'm going to write the way that I want to write. And I like that energy.
Did you want to say fuck you? Because you could say that.
I did. Okay.
Yeah, you can say this. There's no sponsorships here, so you could absolutely say that. I have no
problem.
Yeah, there you
go. But I think this is why, again, I think thinking about it as a system is a more general entry point to developing your own personal goals. And like I mentioned, I think that I sent you the email with the reading system strategies page. I wrote down a lot of the strategies that I use. So I do a lot of like internet world building on YouTube. So I'll find YouTube videos about books that I'm reading, and then I'll watch those, and that like helps me increase my comprehension about the books that I chose. When I'm really not feeling a book, I'll just let it go. You know what I mean? I have way less of a guilty signal than other people do about letting go of books. So I do think that there are general things that every reader needs to do. Again, like having a commonplace book, whether or not you use my form of shorthand, I do think is necessary to having comprehension. I just think it's basically, it's just the way that it is. You know what I mean? But this particular form of shorthand probably is more suited for a smaller group of people. And it would probably apply to other forms because, again, you're just like writing one word and the page number. So I can't imagine that wouldn't work in something like a Cyrillic, but I can't really speak to that because I don't speak Russian. So that would be an unfair conclusion for me to draw, right? But I do think, and again, going back to your particular case, if I were to give you advice, and I think that, this is kind of like something that you can like kind of like write down on a flashcard and think about, and mull over, is that again, you need to become more familiar with just they always say awareness is the start of basically any change in life. Become aware of where you were when you were reading actively, become aware of where you are now when you're not reading actively, and try and figure out the differences between those two people. Maybe it's how you utilized your time. Like you said, oh, I do a lot of side projects. It's a prioritization thing. There's a lot of different ways to read books these days, especially with audiobooks kind of on the market, especially with how quickly you can kind of jump in and out of ebooks. You can always carve aside a little bit of time in the mornings and evenings, or when you're looking at on LinkedIn, you know what I mean? I've written full blocking applications just to make my reading life easier, right? Like I've from scratch. There's so many things that you can do. You just need to choose to prioritize it. And I think that's the first step. And then the second step is to start implementing creative strategies where you can read these books non-linearly even. I'm not even telling you that you have to read every single page of the book that you decide to pick up. Jump through it. Skip around, kind of like put the ideas on paper, hang them up with Post-it cards all over your Post-it notes all over your apartment, kind of like look at them in different situations, turn them into flashcards, turn them into interesting conversation points, make an art piece about them. There's so much that you can do with reading.
Yeah.
And I think that the overall messaging that I try to do with reading as a system, especially recently, is feel free to experiment. Feel free to experiment with yourself. Feel free to decide what feels good and what doesn't feel good about your reading life, and then feel free to change it. You are one of the blessed literati of the modern world. You know what I mean? We've learned this skill of literacy, and then we just sit on it. We have these books more as ornamental visuals than they are useful tools to our lives. And to be able to change that, we need to be able to actively engage with them at a level that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that was excellent. And we're coming up on time here, but I'm going to have one more, or maybe it's technically two more, but they're gimme questions, or maybe they aren't gimme questions. We're going to find out. I mean, I think the first question is going to be a gimme question, which is going to be approximately how many books have you read? Number one, hold on for that. And then number two, this is going to be maybe the harder one, just to finish this out. What is your favorite book?
Oh, right, man.
So do the first one first, which hopefully will be a little easier than the second one.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I get a lot of again, people were like, oh, wow, he reads a lot. He must have great recommendations. And it's like, yes and no. It's like I don't really think so. I think recommendation is I don't know. Again, some recommendations are really good and some aren't. But I will say that I think that I started reading earnestly in 2018. Again, I'm pointing to this wall behind me over here.
Yep.
That my camera died. But up there is about 100 something books. So, there's a lot of books that didn't make 5 stars that I've read. So I would say it's probably 400, 500-ish at this point that I started reading as an adult. And I have no plans on slowing down my pace. So I did the math, and again, like if I have 50 years of keeping up 60 books a year, which is a little more than a book a week, then I will have read 3,000 books, which is both not a lot of books and a lot of books compared to the average person who will go years without reading. Yes. So it's like, it depends on your frame of reference. My favorite book of all time, though, and maybe I was delaying answering this one a little bit, is that I think that it depends. There are like some books that have stuck with me in ways that I didn't expect them to. Good examples of that are Martin Eden, which I brought up earlier in the conversation, was just a book that I was like, I felt so much fellow feeling with the main character of Martin as he was trying to grapple with this intellectual life for somewhat an external goal of falling in love and kind of like making people like him in his life more. I think as a Black person, I felt this need to kind of be overly intellectual to make up for the fact that people think that they don't think that. I don't think that people think that Black people are dumb, but they think that, you know what I mean? There's just extra work that needs to be done there. And I don't want to get into that. But I think that that was an internal insecurity that I felt in Martin Eden's character, that I felt a lot of like, oh, wow, yeah, I get that. I do something similar. And then Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse made me cry when I read it.
Wow.
The feeling of like the river of time, and you spend this whole book with Siddhartha where he's kind of moving through life trying to figure out. Siddhartha becomes the Buddha, right? This is the Gautama kind of nirvana narrative, and so he has all these adventures basically throughout the book, and his son leaves him to go to the big city, and he's like crying at the bank of this river, and the river's just like laughing at him. It's just like, ha ha ha, you dumb idiot, you fool. And he's like kind of upset. He's like, why are you laughing at me? And the river kind of points upstream, and he like looks upstream, and he sees an image of himself doing it to his father. And he's like, oh my God, it just happens over and over. You know what I mean? This is what time is. People suffer, people die, whatever. So I love that book. I love the biography of Vincent van Gogh by Stephen Nafier. I was like, everyone knows Starry Night and they have it as their iPhone wallpapers, but they don't know the guy. They just think of him as like this suffering artist, but they don't know how much this man suffered. Like he was one of the most pitiful human beings of all time, in the sense that he just wanted to have friends and family, and it never worked out for him. He was just miserable his entire life. He was lonely. People would isolate themselves from him. He got bullied by teenagers. The actual prevailing idea is that he didn't kill himself. He was shot by a bullied teenager in his town, and he had already kind of wanted to die anyway, so he kind of just let it happen. That's another good example of this year. I mean, well, no, actually, and then I have a few more that I'll say. The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch really changed my mind about human information and the concept of infinity. And is infinity a graspable object by a regular person? And I think he makes a really compelling argument for that. The Anti-Fragile series by Taleb was a fantastic series that taught me about like the kind of mathematical understanding of economics and kind of game theory in a way that I think he has a really great way of describing things. Developer Hegemony made me quit my job. I didn't want to be in a world where like he basically makes the argument that like when you work a full-time job as like a software engineer or something like that, you're still a contractor, you just have one indefinite end contract. And once I like read it like that, I was like, screw this. You know what I mean? Like, I want to be my own person. I want to be my own business. I don't want to have a boss that's just going to hold this contract over my head and be like, ooh, I can fire you at any moment. You know what I mean? Right. I liked the feeling of control that I get from signing my own contracts as a contractor. So that was an amazing book. I can keep going, but I think that like the arc that I'm describing here is that like, and hopefully this is perhaps inspirational to you or the audience, is that you yourself, when you aren't reading, are depriving yourself of so much majesty and human beauty in this world. There's so much natural beauty, and people will pay thousands of dollars to go on these hikes halfway across the country to look at a mountain. And I'm not saying mountains aren't beautiful. I'm not saying lakes aren't beautiful. I'm not saying you shouldn't spend time with your loved ones. But there have been humans who are like weirdos who have just crafted these deep, deep, deep intellectual ideas and have spent years, decades of their lives trying really hard to get this idea onto page and have sacrificed, economics for it, family relationships, and the Steinbeck, East of Eden, whatever. You get it. Yeah, you wrote a book. And I think that when we don't read, we deprive ourselves of that human beauty. I find that reading, when I'm highlighting words on the page and I'm resonating with concepts on the page, I feel like I'm picking flowers in a bouquet that is this one particular author. And I take them to my Commonplace book, and it's a bouquet of flowers that I've collected over multiple books. And I feel so much inherent individual pride that I don't need to use status or wealth to feel better than my fellow man. I know that I can just return to the books that I like.
Killer. Wow. Love that. Okay. We're going to have to wrap up here, but I want to give you the opportunity, just if you have anything that you want to plug out there, or just where people could find you on the internet, so that they can follow up on more and maybe even, ping you about some of the things that you've mentioned here on the show. I think that would be really helpful. So let the people know where you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So I have like kind of like two main projects going right now. One is this, like if you need reading consulting help, if you want like this kind of intensive personal training, the way that it looks is kind of like a Zoom call where we'll talk about where you currently are with your reading, where you want to be with your goals, and then we'll kind of set up a little bit of an accountability to achieve those goals, right? That is a service that I offer. I also am a cracked developer, and I've been coding for the past decade. So I'm also looking for any contracts if you guys are, if you're hiring specifically, I used to work at OpenAI. So if you're hiring for anybody who needs to have like a deep understanding of how these tools work and like needs to hire someone, I'm available for contract with that. Anything else that I think is important other than what I had just said about myself? You can find me at bramadams.dev. That's like kind of my main website. You can also find me on LinkedIn, or like if bramadams.dev, if you click the link tree, you can find sites where I'm at on GitHub. I've been trying to upload YouTube videos of my reading journals as I've been going, but I just hate the content game so much and I'm so bad at it.
That's all right.
I'm trying my best though. I'm trying.
Yeah, it's hard out here.
It's hard out here. But if I were to narrow it into 2 follow-ups for anybody who's potentially interested, if you're serious about reading, find me and I can help you out. Or if you're serious about some AI system or software system that you need building, find me and I'll help you out.
Super. All right, Bram. Thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate all the insights you've given us out here, and I'm gonna figure out how to read better. I think I'm gonna do some of the stuff that you mentioned to maybe improve my life in there. I have enough goals, and maybe I can put a side project on the shelf or 2. That would probably help out a little bit, right?
I would think that's fantastic. Thank you so much for having me, Donnie, and I'm excited to talk to you soon.
Hell yeah. All right, just stick around for a little bit. Sure. While I address the audience here, thank you so much for watching. But before you go, please help out the show by smashing that like and subscribe button just to get notified the next time that we go live. And feel free to continue the conversation on the official Design Systems Discord. That is at discord.ds.house. There's on the bottom there. Play nice in those comments, and I'll see you on the internet. Bye.